Alex had spent years saving for this moment. After countless late nights working extra shifts and careful budgeting, he finally purchased his dream home, a spacious $500,000 property nestled in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. The house was everything he had imagined: a modern kitchen with gleaming countertops, large windows that filled every room with sunlight, and a backyard perfect for weekend barbecues or peaceful evenings reading a book. Moving in felt like stepping into a new chapter of life, a chapter that promised stability, comfort, and a sense of pride in ownership. From the outside, the neighborhood appeared perfect. Manicured lawns, clean sidewalks, and friendly neighbors who waved politely from their porches created the illusion of an ideal suburban life. The Homeowners Association, known simply as the HOA, had a reputation for being strict but fair. They were known for sending reminders about lawn care, holiday decorations, and mailbox placements, ensuring that the community maintained a polished and consistent look. At first, Alex didn't mind. Rules were rules, after all, and he appreciated a neighborhood that cared about appearances. However, the first signs of trouble began quietly, almost imperceptibly. A few weeks after moving in, Alex received his first HOA notice. It was minor, a reminder that his mailbox post, although new and perfectly maintained, did not match the exact color in the guidelines. He corrected it immediately, thinking little of it. But the notice left an odd feeling lingering in his mind. Something about the tone felt sharper than necessary, as if there was more than a casual oversight behind it. Karen, the president of the HOA, was the first person Alex officially met during a community meeting. At first, she appeared charming and attentive. She smiled warmly, shook hands firmly, and spoke confidently about maintaining the neighborhood's high standards. But beneath that friendly exterior, there was an unmistakable intensity in her eyes, a watchfulness that made Alex feel as though he was being scrutinized more closely than anyone else. When she spoke to him directly, she would often tilt her head slightly, offering comments that sounded polite but carried an underlying firmness, reminding Alex subtly that rules were not merely suggestions. Over the next month, small issues began to accumulate. Alex received letters about lawn edging that was slightly uneven, and reminders that his garden decorations were too close to the curb. Each time, he immediately, yet Karen's notes continued to arrive, each one more pointed than the last. It became clear that someone was paying unusually close attention to his property. Alex began keeping a meticulous folder of every notice, payment, and photograph of his lawn, but the feeling of unease grew. Neighbors, who initially greeted him with casual smiles and polite hellos, started to share whispered stories. At a block gathering, a couple mentioned that Karen had been involved in some controversial HOA decisions in the past. Some homeowners had felt pressured to comply with rules that seemed arbitrary, and a few had even fought small fines, only to find themselves facing more notices. Alex felt a shiver of concern. Could the same thing happen to him? Then came the comment that would linger in his mind for weeks. During a casual discussion about neighborhood improvements, Karen had said almost casually, "We just want everyone to follow the rules. Sometimes people don't understand what's at stake until it's too late." She smiled, and her tone was light, but Alex felt a chill. He couldn't tell if it was meant as a warning, a threat, or simply a cryptic observation. Despite the growing unease, Alex tried to stay positive. He continued tending his garden, making small improvements to the house, and participating in community events. He reminded himself that buying this house had been a dream come true, and that he would not let subtle intimidation take away his peace of mind. Yet in the back of his mind, he could not shake the feeling that his life in the quiet neighborhood was about to change in ways he could not yet imagine. Something about Karen's watchful presence suggested that the battles ahead would be more than minor fines. They could threaten everything he had worked so hard to achieve. By the end of the first month, Alex realized that he needed to be prepared. What had started as minor inconveniences was beginning to feel like a pattern. He promised himself that he would remain vigilant, document every interaction, and ensure that his dream home remained exactly that, a place of safety, comfort, and pride. Little did he know, the real challenge was just beginning, and it would test not only his patience and resourcefulness, but also his determination to protect everything he had built. After settling into his new home, Alex thought the minor notices from the HOA were behind him. For a while, everything seemed normal. He tended his garden, mowed the lawn, and made small improvements to the house, believing that compliance with the rules would keep life peaceful. Yet the sense of unease never fully disappeared. There was something about Karen's sharp attention to his property that felt personal. One morning, Alex received a letter in the mail that made his stomach drop. The HOA had issued a fine for a minor issue, a flower bed that was slightly outside the approved border. It was a small discrepancy, hardly noticeable to any passerby, but according to the HOA, it was a violation of their detailed landscaping rules. Alex had spent hours carefully designing and planting the flower bed. The letter included a fee that seemed disproportionate, and it carried a tone that felt more accusatory than corrective. Alex immediately took photos, measured the flower bed, and compared it to the HOA guidelines. Everything was technically within the rules. He drafted a respectful response, attaching the photos and a note explaining his compliance. A few days later, he dropped the letter off at the HOA office, expecting a reasonable resolution. Instead, he received a polite but firm response from Karen herself, insisting the fine was valid and would not be waived. At first, Alex thought it was a misunderstanding. He assumed that once he explained the situation, common sense would prevail. But soon more letters arrived, each pointing out tiny, sometimes imperceptible issues with his property. The driveway had a slight crack, his grass was not trimmed evenly, and even the placement of his outdoor furniture was questioned. Each time he corrected the issue immediately, but the letters kept coming. It felt as though he could never do enough. Neighbors began to notice the growing tension. At a casual gathering, one resident quietly mentioned that Karen often had conflicts with homeowners who questioned her decisions. They spoke in hushed tones about fines, warnings, and mysterious charges that seemed to appear without explanation. Alex realized that he was not alone. Karen's attention to detail and insistence on strict compliance had affected others before him. It was both comforting and alarming. Comforting because he wasn't imagining things, alarming because he now understood that Karen had a pattern. Alex decided to approach Karen directly. He scheduled a meeting at the HOA office, hoping a face-to-face conversation might clarify matters. When he arrived, Karen greeted him warmly, her smile professional but firm. She listened as Alex explained each fine, showing photos and referencing the official guidelines. For a moment, it seemed as though she might acknowledge a mistake. But then she shook her head and spoke with calm authority, insisting that the rules were clear and that exceptions could not be made. Her tone was polite, but it left no room for negotiation. Walking back to his car, Alex felt a mixture of frustration and disbelief. He had expected to resolve minor misunderstandings amicably, but it was becoming clear that Karen had no intention of bending the rules for him or anyone else. Her influence over the HOA board was apparent, and her interpretation of the guidelines seemed absolute. Every conversation left Alex with a nagging feeling that this was about more than lawn edges and furniture placement. It was about control, and he was starting to feel trapped. Determined not to let the situation escalate further, Alex began documenting everything. He kept copies of all letters, photos of his property, and detailed notes about every interaction with Karen and the HOA. He researched the HOA's rules extensively and even reviewed past board meeting minutes that were publicly available. Each discovery confirmed his suspicion. Karen exercised her authority with a precision and strictness that went far beyond ordinary oversight. Despite the growing tension, Alex refused to panic. He reminded himself that he had purchased this home legally, paid all fees on time, and followed every rule to the letter. He would not allow petty fines or persistent scrutiny to take away the pride he felt in his home. Yet deep down, he knew that if the pattern continued, the situation could escalate. What had started as small letters and fines now felt like a test of patience, resourcefulness, and determination. By the end of the second month, Alex had made a promise to himself. He would respond calmly, document everything, and protect his home with diligence. But he also knew that he could no longer ignore the tension between him and Karen. Something larger was at play, and he sensed that the coming months would challenge not only his understanding of HOA rules, but also his ability to navigate a conflict that threatened the life he had worked so hard to build. Alex had begun to adjust to life under Karen's watchful eye. He stayed meticulous with his lawn, followed every guideline, and responded promptly to every notice. Yet, despite his careful compliance, an unexpected letter arrived that would change everything. It was official-looking, with the HOA's letterhead and formal language. As Alex opened it, his heart sank. The letter claimed that he owed the HOA a substantial sum for unpaid dues and penalties, far more than any fees he had ever received or paid. The most shocking part was the notice of foreclosure. He read the words several times, hoping he had misunderstood. The HOA, under Coren's direction, claimed they had the authority to begin foreclosure proceedings on his home due to unpaid fees. Alex felt a wave of disbelief and panic. He had always paid his fees on time, keeping receipts and records for proof. How could this happen? He tried to remain calm, reminding himself that mistakes happen, but deep down, he knew this was more than a simple administrative error. Alex immediately contacted his lawyer, explaining the situation in detail. The lawyer listened carefully and then confirmed what Alex feared. The HOA could not legally foreclose on a home without following strict procedures, and the amounts listed in the letter were inflated and inconsistent with the records. The warning was clear. This was a serious attempt to pressure him into compliance, and it could have lasting consequences if left unchecked. Determined to understand the situation, Alex dug into the HOA's records. He requested copies of all past notices, payment histories, and board meeting minutes. As he reviewed the documents, he noticed irregularities. Some of the fines appeared to be duplicates, while others had no proper authorization. Certain fees had been added without explanation, and several notices had incorrect dates or signatures. It became clear that Coren's influence over the HOA extended to controlling what records were presented and how they were interpreted. The realization unsettled Alex. What had started as petty fines and minor notices was now escalating into a legal and financial threat. He remembered Coren's earlier comment during a community meeting about understanding what's at stake. Now he began to understand what she had meant. The power to enforce rules or manipulate them gave her an unusual degree of control over the homeowners in the neighborhood. Alex felt both fear and determination. He could not allow the situation to escalate further. Neighbors began to notice the tension around Alex's house. Some offered quiet words of encouragement, hinting that Coren had treated them similarly in the past. Others seemed hesitant to speak, perhaps wary of drawing attention from the HOA leadership. Alex appreciated the support, even if it was limited, because it confirmed that he was not imagining the situation. Coren had a reputation for being thorough, persuasive, and influential, and it was clear that fighting this battle would require more than patience. It would require strategy. Alex and his lawyer began to prepare a formal response. They compiled records of all payments, photographic evidence of compliance, and correspondence with the HOA. Each document reinforced his position. He had fulfilled his obligations and followed the rules to the letter. Yet, as they worked, Alex realized that evidence alone might not be enough. Coren had cultivated trust with other board members and had established herself as the face of the HOA. Confronting her legally would require not only proof, but also careful navigation of the HOA's internal dynamics. Despite the looming threat, Alex refused to panic. He reminded himself that he had purchased this home legally and that his rights as a homeowner were protected under the law. The challenge now was to ensure that those rights were recognized and enforced. With his lawyer's guidance, he filed a formal dispute against the foreclosure notice, demanding a review of the records and an immediate halt to any further actions. That night, as Alex sat in his living room, he looked around at the home he had worked so hard to achieve. The kitchen gleamed under the warm lights, the living room held memories of moving boxes finally unpacked, and the backyard remained his personal sanctuary. The thought that all of this could be taken from him due to false claims was unsettling. Yet amid the fear, a sense of determination took hold. He would not allow his home to be taken through manipulation or oversight. He would fight, document, and stand firm, no matter how challenging the road ahead might be. The letters from the HOA had shifted from minor annoyances to an existential threat, but Alex was ready. The battle had begun, and he understood that the coming months would test not only his patience and resilience, but also his ability to navigate a complex system where rules, authority, and influence could be twisted. The shock of the foreclosure had awakened a new determination within him to protect his home, his life, and the hard work that had made this dream possible. Alex had spent sleepless nights worrying about the foreclosure notice and the mounting letters from the HOA. Each morning, he reviewed his records, making sure every payment was accounted for, every fine documented, and every interaction logged. Despite his diligence, the uncertainty gnawed at him. He knew he needed a deeper understanding of how the HOA operated and what role Karen played in the escalating conflict. With his lawyer's guidance, Alex began requesting all HOA documents that were publicly available. Board meeting minutes, payment records, and internal memos arrived slowly, some heavily redacted, but enough to start painting a clearer picture. As he combed through the files, inconsistencies emerged. Several fees listed as unpaid had actually been paid on time. Some notices had duplicate dates, suggesting errors or manipulation. Certain approvals from the board seemed to lack proper signatures, and in a few cases, the handwriting didn't match any official member. Alex realized he was uncovering a pattern. These weren't random errors. They pointed to deliberate actions designed to create confusion and pressure homeowners into compliance. Karen's fingerprints were on nearly every irregularity. She had a reputation for meticulous record-keeping, and yet the documents he reviewed suggested selective editing, additions, and omissions. It became clear that Karen had cultivated control over the records, influencing how the board perceived compliance and noncompliance. Determined to gather concrete evidence, Alex turned to neighbors who had previously clashed with the HOA. At first, many were hesitant to speak, worried about potential retaliation or gossip. But after Alex explained his situation calmly and showed his careful documentation, a few shared their own experiences. One neighbor mentioned fines for trivial matters like mailbox decorations, while another described being charged for issues that were later proven to be non-existent. Each account confirmed what Alex had begun to suspect. Karen's approach was not simply strict but systematic. The more Alex learned, the clearer it became that this was not a minor dispute. Karen had built an environment where her authority seemed absolute, manipulating records and rules to her advantage. She had positioned herself as the final voice in decisions, and her influence over the HOA board meant challenges to her actions were often ignored or dismissed. Alex realized that the foreclosure notice was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a pattern of control and pressure applied to homeowners. Armed with this knowledge, Alex decided to confront the situation strategically. He began compiling a comprehensive case file, copies of all letters and notices, receipts of every payment, photographs of the property, and records of each interaction with Karen and the HOA. He labeled each item carefully, noting discrepancies and irregularities. His lawyer suggested categorizing the evidence to show patterns of inconsistencies, strengthening their argument against the foreclosure. Despite the mounting stress, Alex approached the situation methodically. He did not act impulsively. He understood that any misstep could weaken his position. Late nights were spent reviewing guidelines, cross-referencing payments, and preparing summaries for his legal team. Slowly, a plan began to form, a clear, evidence-based case demonstrating that Karen's actions were unjustified and that the foreclosure notice had no legal foundation. During this process, Alex also considered the human side of the conflict. He reflected on why Karen might act this way, whether it was a desire for control, a sense of duty taken too far, or a mix of both. Understanding the motivation behind her actions helped him frame his approach. He resolved to remain calm and professional, knowing that any emotional reaction could be used against him. As the weeks passed, Alex felt a growing sense of empowerment. The initial fear and confusion that had accompanied the foreclosure notice began to transform into focus and determination. He was no longer a passive recipient of fines and threats. He had gathered knowledge, organized evidence, and begun to understand the mechanisms of the HOA. This clarity gave him confidence that he could defend his home effectively. By the end of this stage, Alex had built a foundation for the next steps. The discovery of the truth about Karen's influence and the irregularities in the HOA's actions provided a roadmap for legal action and negotiation. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was no longer uncertain. Equipped with evidence, strategic planning, and the support of a few trusted neighbors, Alex prepared to confront the foreclosure notice head-on, ready to protect the home he had worked so hard to achieve. Armed with the knowledge he had uncovered about the HOA's records and Karen's patterns of behavior, Alex realized he could not face the challenge alone. While his lawyer could guide him through the legal system, the influence Karen wielded in the neighborhood meant he needed support from those who had seen her methods firsthand. The situation was delicate. Approaching neighbors required tact, patience, and discretion. He needed allies without creating division or escalating tension unnecessarily. Alex began with quiet conversations, reaching out to neighbors he had casually met in the past. At first, many were hesitant to speak. Karen's reputation for strict oversight had intimidated some, and the fear of being targeted discouraged open discussion. But Alex shared his experiences calmly, showing the detailed records he had maintained. The evidence spoke for itself: payments made on time, fines that lacked justification, and discrepancies in official documents. Slowly, neighbors began to open up. One couple described receiving multiple fines for minor landscaping details. They had tried to appeal, but their concerns were dismissed without review. Another neighbor mentioned that Karen had approved projects for some homeowners while denying identical requests for others, creating a sense of inconsistency that left them frustrated and anxious. These stories aligned with Alex's findings and helped him understand the broader impact of Karen's actions. The pattern was undeniable. Her leadership was creating unnecessary pressure and stress for homeowners who simply wanted to enjoy their properties. Encouraged by this support, Alex began attending HOA meetings more regularly, not as a passive attendee, but as someone prepared to raise questions and present evidence. At the next board meeting, he requested a chance to speak publicly. Karen, as expected, maintained her composed and authoritative demeanor, smiling politely while listening to his request. Alex presented his findings in a clear, organized manner, highlighting discrepancies in fines, irregularities in notices, and inconsistencies in the board's decisions. The room was tense. Some neighbors watched quietly while others whispered among themselves. Karen listened carefully, occasionally interjecting to clarify points or defend her actions. Yet for the first time, a few board members seemed to hesitate. The evidence Alex presented was undeniable, and the calm, factual way he laid out his case made it difficult to dismiss. He noticed nods from residents who had previously remained silent. They were recognizing the truth in his words, validating what they had quietly suspected for months. After the meeting, a small group of supportive neighbors approached Alex. They shared personal experiences and expressed a desire to work together to ensure fairness within the HOA. Alex felt a sense of relief. He was no longer isolated. The community was beginning to recognize the need for transparency and accountability. This growing network of allies would be essential, not only for his immediate situation with the foreclosure notice, but also for future efforts to maintain fairness in the neighborhood. Despite the small victories, Alex remained cautious. Karen was still influential, and her control over official processes could not be ignored. He continued documenting interactions, keeping detailed notes on meetings, conversations, and correspondence. Each piece of evidence strengthened his position and ensured that he could respond effectively to any new challenges. The combination of legal preparation and community support created a strong foundation for the next steps in his fight. Alex also realized that rallying support required patience and diplomacy. He avoided spreading fear or blame, focusing instead on presenting facts and encouraging neighbors to share their experiences. This approach helped maintain credibility and allowed residents to see him as someone seeking fairness rather than conflict. Over time, more people came forward, and a sense of unity began to emerge among homeowners who had felt pressured or overlooked. By the end of this phase, Alex had transformed from a homeowner quietly worried about fines into an informed, determined advocate for fairness in his community. He had gathered evidence, gained the trust of supportive neighbors, and demonstrated that even in a situation dominated by influence and authority, careful planning and collaboration could create a path forward. The stage was now set for the next chapter, confronting the foreclosure legally, with both facts and community support on his side, ready to challenge Karen's actions with clarity and confidence. With community support growing and his evidence meticulously organized, Alex knew it was time to take formal action. The foreclosure notice was not simply an inconvenience. It was a threat to the home he had worked so hard to secure. With his lawyer by his side, he filed a legal challenge against the HOA, demanding that the notice be revoked and that all fines and fees be thoroughly reviewed for accuracy. The filing was precise and detailed, including copies of every payment, photographs of his property, and a timeline of communications with Karen and the board. The first court date arrived quickly, and Alex felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. The courtroom was unfamiliar, filled with legal documents, formal procedures, and the quiet murmur of observers. Across the room, Karen appeared composed, as though she had rehearsed for this exact moment. She was accompanied by a representative from the HOA, ready to present her version of events. Alex took a deep breath, reminding himself that his preparation and evidence were strong, and that he was ready to defend his home. The proceedings began with statements from the HOA's representatives. Karen spoke clearly, citing rules and procedures and presenting documents that she claimed justified the foreclosure. Her tone was confident, her demeanor polished. Yet, Alex noticed small inconsistencies in her presentation. Dates on certain notices did not match the records he had, and some signatures appeared dubious. He felt a quiet surge of reassurance. His careful documentation had anticipated exactly this type of defense. When it was Alex's turn to present, he remained calm and precise. He outlined the timeline of events, from the initial fines to the unexpected foreclosure notice. He presented his evidence, pointing out inconsistencies, duplicates, and errors in the HOA records. He explained his efforts to comply with every rule and highlighted the irregularities in Karen's actions. Each piece of evidence was methodically presented, leaving little room for misinterpretation. The judge listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, and Alex felt a sense of focus sharpen his nerves. During cross-examination, Karen attempted to defend the discrepancies by explaining them as administrative errors. She claimed that the fees had been applied correctly and that the foreclosure notice followed proper procedure. Alex's lawyer countered calmly, highlighting exact examples where documentation contradicted her statements. Duplicate notices, unexplained charges, and missing approvals were all laid out clearly, demonstrating that the foreclosure notice had no legitimate basis. Each revelation chipped away at Karen's credibility, and Alex could see subtle shifts in the demeanor of the court observers. Throughout the process, Alex remained composed, avoiding emotional reactions even when tension rose. He knew that anger or frustration could undermine his case. Instead, he focused on presenting facts, staying organized, and allowing the evidence to speak for itself. His lawyer skillfully guided him through each step, asking pointed questions, and ensuring that the record clearly reflected the inconsistencies and errors in the HOA's claims. Neighbors who had been following the case quietly attended the hearings, some taking notes, others simply observing. Their presence, though subtle, provided Alex with quiet encouragement. He realized that the community support he had carefully cultivated was reinforcing the strength of his position. Karen could not dismiss or manipulate the collective experiences of multiple homeowners, and their observations lent credibility to his claims. As the hearings progressed, a clearer picture began to emerge. The judge recognized the pattern of inconsistencies and the thoroughness of Alex's documentation. Karen's insistence on the validity of the foreclosure appeared weaker in comparison to the organized evidence presented by Alex. The courtroom atmosphere shifted. What had started as a tense confrontation between homeowner and HOA president now leaned toward validation of Alex's efforts to comply and protect his property. By the end of the hearing, Alex felt a cautious sense of optimism. He had confronted Karen's actions directly, presented a comprehensive case, and demonstrated both diligence and fairness. Though the final ruling had not yet been issued, he could see that the weight of evidence and the clarity of his preparation had shifted the balance. For the first time since the foreclosure notice arrived, Alex felt confident that justice was within reach. and that his determination to protect his home had laid the groundwork for a favorable outcome. The legal battle had tested Alex's patience, resilience, and attention to detail. It had forced him to navigate unfamiliar territory, remain calm under pressure, and build support both inside and outside the courtroom. As he left the courthouse, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight was far from over, but he had proven that preparation, persistence, and integrity could create a path forward, even in the face of formidable opposition. The courtroom hearings had strengthened Alex's confidence, but he knew that the battle was not yet over. Karen still held influence within the HOA, and while the inconsistencies in her records had been exposed, the final decision would depend on clear, undeniable evidence. Alex resolved to continue gathering information, determined to leave no room for doubt. His investigation began quietly. He revisited the HOA documents, cross-referencing every notice, every fee, and every board approval. Patterns became increasingly clear. Several charges were completely fabricated, with dates and amounts that did not match his payment history. Other fines had been retroactively approved, long after the notices were issued, indicating procedural shortcuts that were not allowed under the HOA's own rules. Alex documented each irregularity carefully, creating a timeline that left no gaps. In addition to his document review, Alex reached out to more neighbors. Some were hesitant at first, but seeing his careful approach and commitment inspired trust. A few came forward with additional evidence, copies of their own notices, photos, and payment records that confirmed similar discrepancies. One neighbor even provided emails showing Karen's personal involvement in approving fines without board consensus. This was the breakthrough Alex had been hoping for, a direct link between Karen's decisions and the unfair practices affecting multiple homeowners. With this new evidence, Alex and his lawyer refined their legal strategy. The focus was no longer just on his own foreclosure notice, but on demonstrating a pattern of mismanagement and selective enforcement by Karen. By showing that multiple residents had been affected, they could prove that the HOA's actions were not simply errors, but a systematic problem that needed correction. This shifted the momentum of the case significantly. At the next hearing, Alex presented the new evidence. He carefully explained how certain charges were fabricated or improperly approved, showing the documentation from other homeowners to support his claims. Karen attempted to defend her actions, but the consistency and clarity of Alex's presentation made her arguments increasingly unconvincing. Even the judge noted the level of detail and organization in Alex's evidence, highlighting the importance of transparency and fairness in HOA management. Outside the courtroom, word began to spread in the neighborhood. Homeowners who had remained quiet now felt empowered to share their experiences, and more residents reached out to Alex with information. The story of Karen's influence and selective enforcement started to circulate, creating a subtle shift in community perception. What had once seemed like untouchable authority was now being questioned, and the atmosphere of intimidation began to weaken. Alex noticed changes in the behavior of some board members as well. Those who had previously supported Karen began to hesitate, carefully considering their decisions in light of the evidence presented. The weight of proof and community scrutiny made it clear that continued alignment with questionable practices could carry consequences. Alex realized that this shift was as important as the legal evidence itself. Karen's power relied not just on rules but on perception, and that perception was beginning to crack. As the hearings progressed, Karen's attempts to maintain control became less confident. She questioned procedural points that had already been addressed and occasionally contradicted her own earlier statements. Alex remained composed, presenting facts calmly and letting the evidence speak for itself. Every irregularity highlighted, every supporting neighbor testimony introduced, strengthened his position. By the end of the session, it was clear to all present that Alex's case was strong and credible. By the time the court session concluded, Alex felt a mix of relief and cautious optimism. The evidence he had gathered, combined with the support of neighbors and the clarity of his legal presentation, had turned the situation in his favor. Karen's influence, once overwhelming, was now diminished. She had been exposed as the central figure behind the inconsistencies and unfair practices, and it was clear that the HOA would need to follow proper procedures moving forward. For Alex, the experience was both exhausting and empowering. He had transformed from a homeowner quietly worried about fines into a determined advocate for fairness, armed with knowledge, evidence, and community support. The turning point had arrived, not through confrontation or anger, but through careful investigation, persistence, and a commitment to truth. With the final ruling approaching, Alex was prepared to reclaim his home fully and ensure that fairness prevailed in his neighborhood. After months of tension, uncertainty, and careful preparation, the day of the final ruling arrived. Alex felt a mixture of nerves and determination as he entered the courthouse. The weight of everything he had experienced, the fines, the foreclosure notice, the hours of documentation, and the support of neighbors, hung heavily on his mind. This was the moment that would determine whether he could finally reclaim the peace and security of his home. Inside the courtroom, Karen sat with a composed expression, but Alex noticed subtle signs of strain. Her confident demeanor seemed less assured than before. The evidence presented over the past hearings, combined with the testimonies from multiple homeowners, had exposed inconsistencies and selective enforcement that could no longer be ignored. Karen's influence over the HOA board had been diminished, and the momentum now favored Alex. When the judge spoke, the room fell silent. Every word carried weight, and Alex listened intently. The ruling addressed each of the issues he had raised: the duplicated and fabricated fines, the procedural errors, and the undue pressure applied through the foreclosure notice. The judge acknowledged the thorough documentation Alex had provided, noting that it clearly demonstrated a pattern of mismanagement and selective enforcement within the HOA. The judge's conclusion was decisive. The foreclosure notice was declared invalid, and all fines that lacked proper authorization were rescinded. Alex's home was fully restored to his control, and the legal records reflected his compliance with every legitimate rule. Karen was ordered to step down from her role within the HOA, and the board was directed to implement stricter oversight and transparent procedures to prevent similar situations in the future. As Alex left the courtroom, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. The months of anxiety and meticulous preparation had culminated in justice. The house he had purchased, worked for, and nurtured was finally secure. More than that, the process had reinforced his belief in careful planning, persistence, and the power of evidence-based advocacy. He had faced an intimidating situation and emerged victorious through diligence and calm determination. Returning home, Alex was greeted by neighbors who had supported him throughout the ordeal. Their smiles, congratulations, and expressions of solidarity were profoundly reassuring. It became clear that his fight had not only protected his home, but had also inspired others to seek fairness within the community. The neighborhood, which had once been overshadowed by strict enforcement and selective rules, began to feel more open and transparent. Alex realized that his actions had contributed to a broader sense of accountability. In the days that followed, Alex focused on restoring his home to the life he had imagined. He repaired minor damages that had occurred during the stressful months, rearranged the garden he loved, and hosted a small gathering to thank the neighbors who had come forward with their support. The atmosphere was lighter, and the sense of relief was palpable. For Alex, these simple moments of normalcy underscored the importance of perseverance and community engagement. Reflecting on the experience, Alex recognized several key lessons. Documentation, careful planning, and attention to detail had been essential in protecting his rights. Staying calm and professional, even under pressure, had strengthened his credibility and allowed the evidence to speak for itself. Most importantly, building support and connecting with neighbors had not only provided additional proof, but had also fostered a sense of collective fairness that would benefit the entire community in the long term. Though the ordeal had been stressful, Alex felt stronger for having faced it. He had navigated a complex system, challenged an intimidating figure, and ensured that justice was served. His home, once threatened, now stood as a symbol of persistence, careful advocacy, and the importance of standing up for what is right. The neighborhood, too, began to heal, with new policies and a greater awareness of fairness and transparency guiding the HOA's actions. As evening fell over the quiet streets, Alex sat on his porch, looking at the home he had fought to protect. The garden was bathed in soft sunlight, The house appeared as welcoming as ever, and the neighborhood felt peaceful once more. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not just for winning the legal battle, but for demonstrating that diligence, preparation, and community support could overcome even the most challenging obstacles. His home was safe, and his determination had restored not only his property, but also his faith in fairness and justice. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.